What's up guys, this is Ultimate Device Vids, and today in this video we're going to be doing a speed test between the new 2022 third generation iPhone SE and the 2020 second generation iPhone SE and the 2016 first generation iPhone SE. And I want to mention a few things before we get started. As you can see, all three devices are running at their peak performance capability in regards to battery health. They're also all running the latest version of iOS 15 as of recording this video. And alright, let's go ahead and kick things off with some app launching tests. So we're just going to start off with just a few stock applications, and then we'll get into a bunch of App Store applications. So as to be expected, with simple stock applications like these, super quick launch times across all three of these devices, again, given that these applications are, pretty light, simple applications. Maybe occasionally like a split-second difference between some of the generations. So we're going to move on to a bunch of App Store applications. So we're going to start off with some lighter App Store applications like Instagram and Twitter here. And as you can see with these applications, it's basically the same result, just a very minor difference between these three generations. Of course, again, the newer the generation is, you can see it does open up the application a little bit faster. But with simpler, lighter App Store applications as well, it's going to be, a very negligible difference. And Apple's release cycle for the iPhone SE phones has been pretty inconsistent so far. So what I mean is the iPhone SE first generation came out in 2016 and the second generation came out 4 years later in 2020. However, the third generation iPhone SE that just came out, of course, only came out 2 years after the second generation was released. So as a result of this, you're going to see a much bigger performance gap when comparing the first generation to the second generation than when comparing the second generation to the third generation. And that is reflected in this test, as you can see. The second and third generation iPhone SEs are very neck and neck throughout this test, as they're only 2 years apart in terms of processing power. While the processing power gap between the iPhone SE first generation and second generation is 4 years. But this being said, the performance on all three of these devices, even the iPhone SE first generation, is quite good. With average day-to-day later applications, you're really not going to notice too much of a difference unless you're comparing them side by side like we're doing right now. And even as we get into some of the much heavier applications towards the end of this app launching test, all three devices do a perfectly fine job getting into these applications, but again, the older the device is, it just takes a little bit longer, especially again the iPhone SE first generation. And Apple's tradition with the iPhone SE is whenever they release a new version of this phone, they put the latest processor from the latest flagship series iPhones in the SE. So the new iPhone SE third generation has the Apple A15 chip, which is the very same processor found in all of the iPhone 13 series iPhones. The iPhone SE second generation has the Apple A13 chip, which is the same chip that's found in the iPhone 11 series iPhones. And the iPhone SE first generation has the Apple A9 chip, which is the same processor found in the iPhone 6S series iPhones. So you basically receive the exact same performance as, those iPhones that I mentioned on these iPhones, just for, a cheaper price with a slightly older design. And if I had to guess why Apple released the iPhone SE third generation so quickly after the second generation, it's probably because Apple wanted to release a cheaper iPhone that supports 5G. Because of course the iPhone SE third generation here does support 5G. But anyways, as you can see, we've moved on to Asphalt 9, which is a pretty heavy application that notoriously takes a very long time to launch, especially on older iPhones. So we're just going to go ahead and speed through here until the iPhone SE first generation opens up Asphalt 9. And next up, as usual, we're going to run a consecutive app launching test. So I'm going to launch the same set of App Store applications consecutively, one after the next, on all three of these devices, and I'm going to show all three of the devices doing this side by side to show any speed difference. And alright, let's go ahead and kick things off. And as you can see here, all three devices are getting into and getting out of these applications in pretty fast succession. Overall, I'd say the same trends that showed in the previous app launching test also are shown here, with the iPhone SE second and third generation being neck and neck. Of course, that third generation being a little bit ahead, but again, in day-to-day life, it'd almost be imperceivable difference between those two, while the iPhone SE first generation is definitely a little bit more noticeably behind, as it is several generations older than the latest 2 generations of the iPhone SE. And just like before, as we start to get into some of the slightly heavier game applications, the iPhone SE first generation does fall, behind several applications, but again, it catches up pretty quickly, as you're going to see here as the test goes on. It's able to handle all the tasks perfectly fine. Again, it just takes a few seconds longer, which for the average phone user is really not going to be that big of a deal. I think it's quite impressive that the iPhone SE first generation still supports iOS 15. But not only that, just the fact that it's still perfectly usable in 2022 by my standards, and probably by most people's standards, certainly in terms of performance. And of course, as to be expected, with these super heavy, bigger game applications, a bigger difference is going to show on the older generations, especially, of course, the iPhone SE first generation. And we're just going to speed through the remainder of the consecutive app launching test here until the iPhone SE first generation completes the set of applications. And real quick, directly following the consecutive app launching test, we're just going to go back into each application that we opened and see which applications are still open as a little bit of a RAM management check. And it's definitely worth mentioning, we didn't do anything super CPU intensive by any means, but I just wanted to go back in and just see which applications were able to be kept open. And the iPhone SE third and second generation devices were able to keep every single application open, and the iPhone SE first generation was able to keep most of the applications open with the exception of Google Maps, Temple Run, PUBG, and Asphalt 9. And just to let you guys know, the iPhone SE third generation has 4 GB of RAM, the second generation has 3 GB of RAM, and the first generation has 2 GB of RAM. Next, we're going to be comparing the speed of unlocking all 3 of these iPhones with Touch ID, and as you can see, they're blazing fast on all 3 of them. No complaints there on any of these. I think everyone can agree that Apple's Touch ID fingerprint reader on the home button style iPhones is just a very convenient and quick way to unlock your phone. Next, I just want to load a few web pages in Safari. You should definitely keep in mind that with tests like this, of course, the results largely depend on the internet connection that you're using, so take these results lightly. But just viewing this as getting a general ballpark idea of how these 3 devices are able to load simple web pages like a few web pages on google.com and apple.com, you could see that all 3 devices are just blazing fast. I mean, basically imperceivable difference when doing tasks like this. Very quick and responsive on all 3 of them. Of course, this could also vary depending on the type of web page that you're loading as well. And in terms of scrolling smoothness and speed, as you can see, perfectly fine on all of them. Very smooth, nothing to complain about here. Again, this could also depend on the type of web page that you're loading as well. And lastly, I want to run a few benchmark tests. We're going to start off with Geekbench 5. And as to be expected, the single and multi-core scores just go straight down the line of generations, newest to oldest. And we're also going to run an Antutu benchmark. And same thing to report here with the numbers just straight down the line as to be expected. So there you guys have it. At the end of the day, I think all 3 of these devices perform quite well in 2022 on iOS 15. I think all 3 of these devices are perfectly usable by most people's standards in terms of speed and performance. If you guys use any of the iPhone SE models, let me know down below in the comments section how the speed and performance has been for you. Thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace out.